Chapter 1213, Golden Hairpin Zue, in Chong, and was a branch of Golden Hairpin Zue, in Luoyang. When Wu Zetian moved back to Chong, and in her later years, the owner of Golden Hairpin Zue also took the opportunity to open a branch in Chong, and, as expected, business was booming, especially for those who moved from Luoyang to Chong. And many of them liked to come to this old restaurant in Luoyang to drink, which made this restaurant famous in Chong. And it was easy for Princess Taiping's people to find out the location of this hotel. This hotel was located in the East City, very close to Longqing Square. So Princess Taiping drove directly to Golden Hairpin Zue. Although Golden Hairpin Zue in Chong and was a branch, it was bigger than Golden Hairpin Zue in Luoyang. It was 5 stories high, like an ancient pagoda. The higher the floor, the smaller the area, but the more luxurious the interior decoration was. Even the tables were very particular. The style of the highest floor was completely different from that of the lower floors. It appeared to be very simple and elegant. There were no gorgeous decorations at all. The tables, lamps, and utensils were no longer made of gold or silver. Instead, there was a sense of grace and elegance to it. Generally, those who chose to stay and entertain guests here were the rich and powerful. 2 vulgar decorations obviously wouldn't attract their attention. There was a relatively spacious place in front of the hall, which was convenient for the dancers and musicians. But now it was empty. There were only 2 guests sharing a table. Sometimes they whispered, and sometimes they laughed. But the whole roof was too empty, so it was still quiet. A pretty girl was kneeling behind the master. She was wearing a yellow kimono embroidered with red cherry blossoms, and a wide snow-white belt was tied around her slender waist. Although she was kneeling, she appeared to be graceful and spirited, beautiful and pure. She listened to the owner and the guest with a gentle smile and took the opportunity to pour wine for them. After a while, the guest bowed to the owner and said goodbye. The owner didn't get up. He just smiled and nodded to the guest, watching him stride away. When the guest disappeared at the top of the stairs, the owner sighed softly. He closed his tipsy eyes slightly and fell back, lying on the soft and round thighs of the girl. The man lying on the beauty's lap was naturally Yang Fan, and the man who just left was Su Liang. Recently, when Yang Fan was meeting with his old friends, he often chose this place instead of his mansion. He had left the imperial court, so he naturally could not cut off his friendship. However, he did not want to continue to have too many connections, so he could only show it in some small details, such as the banquets. The fact that he did not entertain guests at home was his signal. Through this exchange with Su Liang, Yang Fan was finally relieved about the future of his comrades. In the 6 months since he left Chang, and his brothers in the army had already completed a major turning point in their lives. Li Longji had once promised him that he would treat his brothers well and not harbor any suspicions towards them. This stemmed from Li Longji's immense confidence in himself. Yang Fan believed in his promise, especially when Li Longji had ignored Wang Maozhong, who had abandoned him at a critical juncture. Li Longji had appointed him as a 3rd-rank Grand General of Guide Virtue. This made Yang Fan even more confident that Li Longji wasn't a ruthless person who would cook his hounds after the cunning hare was killed. But even so, he still planned ahead and gave his brothers some instructions before he left. Chu Kuanga, Ma Qiao, and the others were a group of pure soldiers. They had no ambition, but given their positions, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't be schemed against. Although it was glorious to be a general of the Yulin Guard, the risks they had to bear were also great. Yang Fan instructed them to resign from their military positions in the Yulin Guard to the emperor and to be transferred to other guards in the northern or southern branches, or even to serve in the local or frontier areas. These people had great trust in Yang Fan, so they naturally obeyed his instructions. Now, Ma Qiao, Huang Xuchang, and the others had smoothly been transferred to the southern branch, and Chu Kuanga had asked to go to the western regions. When these generals were transferred out of the Yulin Guard, they had all been promoted by 1 or 2 ranks. Now, no matter where they were placed, they were all generals with great authority. The only one left in the Yulin Guard was Su Liang, who still held the position of commander-in-chief, but didn't directly command the troops. With his brother's affairs settled, Yang Fan was naturally relieved. Resting his head on a round, charming, and fragrant thigh, Yang Fan's body completely relaxed, but there was still a hint of heaviness in his heart. He had originally thought that the future of his brothers was the last problem he needed to worry about. Who knew that when he was far away in Japan, he would suddenly hear news of Taiping's ambition. Yang Fan never thought that Princess Taiping would be so keen on power. She was a princess of the Tang dynasty and the younger sister of the current emperor. She had taken care of the emperor's family for many years and was highly respected and favored by the current emperor. She could have always enjoyed a happy life and maintained her influence on the court, but she actually coveted the throne? Yang Fan couldn't believe that she would make such a choice, but he had to believe it. If his subordinates didn't have more conclusive evidence, they wouldn't have reported it to Tianshu, and the think tanks of Tianshu wouldn't have made such a judgment and sent people across the sea to urgently report to him. However, Taiping refused to see him and ignored him 3 times in a row. If Yang Fan wanted to see her, it was not impossible. With his martial arts, he could even sneak into the heavily guarded princess mansion. The problem was that Taiping was so unyielding. If she was determined to see him, what was the point of sneaking into the princess mansion and seeing her? Thinking of this, Yang Fan sighed deeply. He could accept that Taiping had left him, but how could he sit back and watch her go into the abyss? He didn't understand what Taiping had been pursuing all her life. Now that the Li Tang dynasty finally had a more satisfactory situation, why did she create trouble? Sir, you can't go up. The upper floor has been reserved by a guest. Ouch. The voice of the waiter came from the stairway, followed by the sound of someone rolling down the stairs. It seemed that someone had pushed him down the stairs. Yang Fan's heart trembled. His guards were guarding downstairs. How could someone rush up without a sound and ask the waiter to stop them? Yang Fan suddenly sat up, but he only glanced at the stairway before his tense body suddenly relaxed. There was a scholar in a white robe at the stairway. She wore a green gauze cap on her head and a leather belt around her waist. Her face was like jade, and she was elegant and elegant. It was Princess Taiping, dressed in men's clothes. Liangzhou, the Ma family's old restaurant. The female receptionist leaned over the table and flirted with the customers who were talking dirty. Some people were sitting there holding large bowls and eating, while others were holding horsewhips and strode back and forth through the hall. In the front courtyard, cows, horses, alpacas, and all kinds of goods were in a mess, giving off an unpleasant smell. Ever since Moshe changed the strategy of the Eastern expedition to invade the Western regions, the relationship between the Turks and the Tang dynasty had eased a lot. Last year, Moshe had won a great victory in the Western expedition, but because they underestimated the enemy, they fell into an ambush. This battle changed the situation from a great victory to a great defeat, and the Turks suffered a great loss. In order to supply the soldiers, horses, cattle, and sheep needed for Moshe's Western expedition, many of the tribes in the East who were dependent on Moshe suffered unspeakable hardships. Now that Moshe was defeated, their control over the East rapidly declined. Many tribes took the opportunity to break away from the Turks and seek refuge with the Tang dynasty. The Tang dynasty did not reject any of those who surrendered and settled them in the Liangzhou area for their safety. And of course, to restrain these surrendered tribes, the imperial court also appointed the Right Yulin General Xuan'an as the chief supervisor of Liangzhou, with the Qishui army stationed in Liangzhou. They also appointed the left guard General Guo Qianguan as the chief supervisor of Shuofang, with the Qishui army stationed in Bingzhou. The sudden increase of so many tribes and garrisons meant that Liangzhou needed a lot of daily necessities. At the same time, there was a lot of livestock that could be sold. This was a great business opportunity for merchants, so there were merchants everywhere, making it the most developed place in the western regions. The Ma family's old restaurant occupied a large area. In the backyard of the house, there were large livestock pens. Behind the pens, near the wall, there were several houses that seemed to be the living quarters of the workers who took care of the livestock. This place was extremely secluded and quiet, so it was difficult to attract the attention of outsiders. A man in a Chinese-style leather robe passed through the long livestock area and came to a secluded small courtyard in the backyard. He pushed open the courtyard door and walked in. In the small courtyard, there was a scholar sitting under a tree, reading a book. The small courtyard was very clean, but the outside was full of livestock sheds. The smell was extremely bad, but the scholar was calm and did not care about the bad environment around him. As soon as the courtyard door was closed, the man in the leather robe hurriedly reported, "Young master, there is a big business today. You have to make the decision." The scholar raised his head and looked slightly surprised. "What kind of big business is it that you need me to make the decision?" This person was Lu Binji. He actually hid in the western regions, in Shunmu's old nest. Who would have thought that he was hiding in the most dangerous place? Moreover, the movement of people in Liangzhou was very frequent, and the composition of people was extremely complicated. The official household registration system was very difficult to use here, so it was no wonder that the obvious and hidden sects could not find him. The man in the leather robe, and dressed like a local man, was Lu Binji's advisor Ding Yu. Ding Yu excitedly said, "The person who contacted me said that his master is called Ashina Musi, the son of the Turkic Khan Moshe. Because his voice is hoarse, he was given the cold shoulder by his family, and his tribe was ostracized by the other tribes, so he angrily betrayed the Turkic Khaganate." Hearing this, Lu Binji was somewhat moved. A skinny camel was still bigger than a horse. Since this person was Moshe's son, even if he was not valued, his tribe was still a wealthy tribe in the current Liangzhou. After falling into Yang Fan and Shunmu's trap, Lu Binji almost lost all his family's wealth. Now that he wanted to make a comeback, he urgently needed financial support. So he could not ignore such a big customer. Lu Binji anxiously asked, "What does he want to buy, and what price does he want to pay?" Ding Yu said, "Musi is not willing to be abandoned by his family, and he has always wanted to use force to take back the position of Khagan. However, the Turkic Khaganate is oppressed by the other major tribes, and there is no chance for him to grow stronger, so he hardened his heart and betrayed the Tang dynasty. But the Tang dynasty will give him farmland, pastures, and provide for him to raise his people, but they will not give him weapons, so he will not have a powerful force. So, I understand." Lu Binji put down the scroll, and with his hands behind his back, he paced around the small courtyard twice. Suddenly, he stopped and said, "This person is worth meeting. This person will become our old customer and help us recover our strength as quickly as possible. Where has his tribe been settled? I will personally go and meet him." 40 li to the west of Liangzhou was a fortress, and around the fortress was a large piece of land that could be used for farming. Further west was a desolate and uninhabited grassland that spanned several hundred li. This was the pastoral land of the Ashina Musi tribe. Lu Binji and a few guards disguised as local people riding fast horses towards Musi's stronghold. As soon as they arrived, the people of Musi's clan, who were guarding in front of the stronghold, immediately used their horns to send a message into the stronghold. Musi, who had long known that there would be a wealthy merchant from the Central Plains paying a visit today, immediately came out with a few trusted subordinates to welcome them. Lu Binji went forward with a smile, and when he saw Musie's appearance, he was so shocked that his soul almost left his body. Drawing his saber in shock, he shouted, "We've been tricked! He is Yang Fan." Chapter 12:14. On the top floor of Drunken Golden Hairpin, Princess Taiping and Yang Fan sat opposite each other. She did not touch the wine that Xingzi poured for her. Erlang, if it was you, when you have made all kinds of preparations, mobilized a large number of people, and are about to start the change of the dragon, can you stop if I come forward to persuade you to stop? Looking at Yang Fan's silence, Princess Taiping smiled calmly. Me too, I can't turn back. That is an excuse. Yang Fan raised his eyes. It is not that you have no way out. No matter how hard it is to stop, is it more difficult than continuing to fight with your family? You are the younger sister of the emperor and the aunt of the crown prince. Whether it is the current emperor or the emperor, they are not cold-blooded people. As long as you let go of your delusion, they will not make things difficult for you. Princess Taiping sneered. Delusion? What is delusion? We have the same bloodline, but just because I am a woman, it is delusion to want to be the emperor, and no matter how mediocre that man is, he can naturally be the emperor. Who set this rule? Even if it is set by heaven, my mother broke this rule. But she still lost in the end and became the empress of the Tang dynasty. Today is very different from the empress. Linghua, I do not want you to fall off the cliff and be smashed to pieces. Princess Taiping's eyes lit up. Then, come and help me. As long as you are willing to help me, my chance of success will at least double. Yang Fan looked at Princess Taiping's shining eyes, and his heart was filled with sorrow. He found that he could not persuade Taiping. She could not listen to anything. Her heart had been possessed by the devil. Princess Taiping looked at his expression, and her eyes were also filled with sorrow. You are not willing? You rebelled against my mother because you could not stand a woman in power. Later, you rebelled against Empress Wei because if she gained power, your family and your brothers would not have a good ending. You can draw your sword for your ambition. For your family, draw your sword. For your brothers, draw your sword. But you will not work for me. Princess Taiping slowly stood up. It is a mistake for me to come today. In addition to bringing me more disappointment, there is nothing. She turned and walked towards the entrance of the building. Yang Fan looked at her back and called out weakly. Princess Taiping didn't look back. She walked out step by step and said lightly, "One Ursenitaf didn't bury her, but the love between you and me. Take care of yourselves. I have my own path to walk." In Musie's castle, although Lu Binji had already figured out that this was all a misunderstanding, he still felt apprehensive as he sat across from Musie. Musi and Yang Fan looked exactly the same, but because of their different life experiences over the years, Musie's skin was rougher than Yang Fan's. Her face also looked older, but her facial features were still very similar. That was why Lu Binji was scared out of his wits at first sight. He thought that Yang Fan had disguised himself and came to Liangzhou to lure him. Musi used his hoarse and unpleasant voice to talk to Lu Binji about the number of swords, bows, and armors he wanted to buy. Most of the time, he just pointed out the main points and instructed his subordinates to elaborate. Lu Binji listened absent-mindedly. There seemed to be a window in his heart that could be pierced with a poke. Musi used his hoarse voice and said, "Young master, these things I need can be paid with gold and silver, slaves, and cattle. But I don't know when you can buy these things for me." Lu Binji suddenly looked up and said, "Your Excellency's throat, has it really not been cured yet?" Lu Binji's sudden words stunned everyone in the tent. Yang Fan couldn't think of a way to stop Taiping. Even if he was still in the officialdom, he couldn't stop her. Taiping, who was stubborn, couldn't turn back. No one could stop her from moving forward on the path she had chosen. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. This matter had become a sore point in Yang Fan's heart, and he couldn't get rid of it. That night, Yang Fan was thinking hard in his study. "Father, quickly come and see." Yang Ji ran into the study, his voice still changing. He excitedly pulled him up and said, "Father, there's a phenomenon in the sky. Quickly come and see." Yang Fan was curiously pulled by his son to the courtyard. He saw his family members and many servants standing in the courtyard, looking up at the sky and pointing at it. Yang Fan looked up and saw a large star stretching across the night sky. It was abnormally bright, and the large star even had a long glowing tail behind it. Yang Fan couldn't help but laugh. "I was wondering what kind of phenomenon it was. So it's a jinx." Yang Serong, who was looking up at the sky, asked curiously, "Father, what is a jinx?" Yang Fan's thoughts suddenly returned to the distant past. The big ship rode the wind and waves, and he stood at the bow, looking at a big star in the sky. The comet in the sky attracted everyone's attention. In the palace, Li Dan, who had been focused on tending to the flowers and plants, also straightened her back. She stood on the stone steps and looked at the sky curiously. She ordered, "Quickly send an order to the imperial astronomer to investigate the cause of the phenomenon." In an exquisite small building in Princess Taiping's residence, a woman with the surname Wu leaned on the railing and looked at the sky for a long time. She stared at the 2-feet-long blue comet in the night sky for a long time. At this moment, an old man in a long robe quickly came up the building. He panted slightly and bowed to her. He said happily, "Congratulations, Princess. Heaven is helping Princess." Princess Taiping turned around in surprise and asked, "Mr. Amo, why am I happy?" The next morning, the imperial astronomer, Zhang Ziming, bowed down and reported in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, there was a big star in the sky last night. It came from the west and entered Taiwei. The emperor's throne is facing a disaster. The crown prince will become the emperor." As soon as these words came out, all the officials were shocked. Yang Si-sun stood on the steps and shouted for silence, but he could not stop it. In the midst of the chaos, a palace guard suddenly rushed up to the hall and reported, "Your Majesty, the Master of the Holy Benevolence Temple and the Duke of Yi Hui Fan have an urgent matter to report to the Emperor." Li Dan's mind was in a mess. He hurriedly said, "Send it in." A moment later, a monk with a beard and sunken eyes walked into the Golden Hall. He bowed to Li Dan and said, "This poor monk, Hui Fan, greets your Majesty." Li Dan asked, "What does the monk have to report to me?" Hui Fan said, "Your Majesty, I observed the sky yesterday and discovered that the comet came from the west and entered Taiwei. This is a sign of the shaking of the monarch's power. It is inauspicious for your Majesty. I am afraid that your Majesty will face a disaster of war and blood, so I hurried here to report." The people of the time had great faith in the celestial phenomena. According to the theory of celestial perception, major changes in the celestial phenomena corresponded to major changes in the human world. When Yang Fan wandered into Guangzhou and was taken out to sea by Curlybeard's descendant, Zhang Qua, he had seen a large star appear in the sky. At that time, the Empress of Heaven, Wu Zetian, thought that it was an auspicious sign that she would replace her son as the emperor. She even happily changed the year's name to Guangzhai. When the officials saw this unusual phenomenon, they were already discussing spiritedly. When the Directorate of Heaven said it, they believed 50 to 60% of it. Now that Hui Fan's senior monk's words coincided with the Directorate of Heaven's, all the officials believed without a doubt. Hui Fan's words were even more direct than the Directorate of Heaven's. The monarch's power will be shaken, and the emperor will face a disaster of blood. What does this mean? After understanding the hidden meaning, all the officials were shocked. The ministers who supported the crown prince immediately felt that something was wrong. They were afraid that the emperor would immediately issue an edict to capture the crown prince in order to protect himself. A few of the ministers gathered their courage and were about to refute Hui Fan's theory of ghosts and gods when they heard Li Dan's voice from the throne. A large star appearing in the sky. Does this mean that the throne has changed hands? In that case, we will comply with the will of heaven and abdicate the throne for the crown prince to inherit. Li Dan's words silenced the entire Golden Hall. The Directorate of Astronomy, Zhang Ziming, and Hu Sing Hui Fan were both stunned. The emperor's reaction was a bit unexpected. We clearly told the emperor that the crown prince has ill intentions and will immediately start a rebellion. Shouldn't the emperor immediately capture the crown prince? Even if he isn't killed, he should be imprisoned. How? The two swindlers only knew how to act mysteriously under someone's orders. Faced with this kind of situation, they didn't know how to react. They looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Li Dan stood up and said with a rare decisiveness, "We are tired of government affairs and have long lost interest in being the emperor. Time and time again, we have to pass the throne to the crown prince, and it's all because of you. Now that the heavens have given us a warning, if we continue to ignore it, the heavens will punish us. Thus, we have decided to abdicate the throne." Li Longji was currently in the East Palace. Upon hearing this news, he hurriedly rushed to the Golden Hall and kowtowed to his father. "Father, you mustn't do this. Your son obtained your recognition with a small contribution and surpassed my brothers to become the crown prince. I have been restless all day and night. So why are you in such a hurry to abdicate the throne? Your son is terrified and doesn't dare accept it." Li Dan said, "Samling, the reason why I have the world is not because of my power, but because of your contributions. Today, the heavens have given us a warning that the emperor's throne is facing a calamity. Thus, I want to abdicate the throne to you in order to turn this calamity into a blessing. Don't refuse." Li Longji repeatedly kowtowed. "Your son is terrified. Please, father, take back your order." Li Dan was impatient. In his opinion, since the heavens were warning him that his life would be in danger if he continued to be the emperor, then he should abdicate the throne. In any case, he was already annoyed at being the emperor. Wouldn't abdication solve all his problems? Li Dan slapped the table and angrily said, "The will of the heavens cannot be defied. Now, the heavens want me to abdicate the throne. If Sanlang is a filial son, then you should happily agree. Do you really want the heavens to send a calamity down on me and then ascend the throne in front of my spirit?" Li Longji turned pale with fright and hurriedly kowtowed. "Your son doesn't dare. Your son doesn't dare." Li Dan said, "Since you don't dare, then don't refuse. Ministers and the Board of Rites, immediately prepare for the new emperor's coronation ceremony. Immediately announce to the world that the crown prince will ascend the throne in 3 days." After saying this, Li Dan relaxed and returned to the inner palace. He was still thinking about watering the pot of exotic flowers from overseas that he had found yesterday. All the civil and military officials were dumbfounded. The throne that countless people fought over and would rather die than give up is actually worthless in the eyes of the current emperor. Chapter 12:15. In Princess Taiping's mansion, Mr. Mo said to Princess Taiping with a face full of guilt, "Princess, this is all my fault. I never thought that the emperor would react like this when he heard about the catastrophe of the comet. I was careless and ruined your highness's plan. I really..." Princess Taiping waved her hand disappointedly and smiled bitterly at him. "Forget it. I can't blame you for this. I didn't expect that my brother would make such a choice. Alas, my Li family has always produced strange people. I can't blame you, can't blame you. Mr. Mo stepped forward and said, Princess, when Sanlang was the crown prince, he already had a righteous reputation. Now that he is going to ascend the throne and become the emperor, he will have the hearts of the people. Your Highness, you should seriously consider your future now. Princess Taiping slowly turned to him with a gloomy face. What advice does Mr. Mo have? Mr. Mo said, In my opinion, Sanlang's fate is already unstoppable. If Princess can stop in time and hand over all the power in your hands, ask the retired emperor to mediate and ask for the crown prince's forgiveness, you may be safe. This is the so-called best plan. Princess Taiping's eyes suddenly sharpened. Her voice softened, and she slowly asked, Then what is the worst plan? Mr. Mo said, The worst plan is to take advantage of the fact that Sanlang has just ascended the throne and hasn't had time to clean up the princess's followers. We should mobilize the 5 prime ministers of the political affairs hall, the ministers of the court, and the generals in the army to immediately carry out a mutiny. Otherwise, even if it is delayed for 1 more year, the new emperor's throne will be stable. Princess Taiping was silent for a while and said sternly, I won't admit defeat. Princess Taiping suddenly turned around and said in a trembling voice, In my life, I have only bowed my head to someone twice. The first time, it ruined my whole life. The second person, it was that person who betrayed me. From now on, I will never bow my head to anyone, never. Princess Taiping hurriedly left the mansion and entered the palace. She knew that it was impossible, but she still decided to persuade Li Dan to retract his order. Li Dan had finally obtained his freedom, and he was not willing to go back on his word. This was the first time he firmly refused his sister's request. Lingyue, I have made up my mind to pass the throne to avoid disaster. You don't have to persuade me anymore. Princess Taiping saw that Li Dan was determined, so she settled for the second best option. She tried to persuade Li Dan that even though he would abdicate to become the emperor emeritus, the affairs of the country should still be handled by him personally. Li Dan was still unwilling, but he couldn't resist his younger sister's persuasion again and again. In the end, he could only take a step back and decided the appointment of officials of the 3rd rank and above, as well as the major criminal cases, will still be decided by the emperor. Taiping secretly let out a sigh of relief. As long as the appointment and removal of officials above the 3rd rank still depended on her brother, then even if Li Longji became emperor, he still wouldn't be able to touch the prime minister and the 6 ministers. In this way, her main staff wouldn't be affected, and she would still have the strength to fight. Since he had achieved his goal, Taiping did not say anything more. He immediately took his leave and went back to prepare for any changes. 3 days later, Li Dan officially passed down the throne to the crown prince. After another 8 days, all kinds of rites were prepared. Li Longji ascended the throne and proclaimed himself emperor, honoring his father, Li Dan, as the emperor emeritus. The emperor emeritus called himself Zhan and issued an edict Gao. Once every 5 days, he received the morning court in Taiji Palace Hall and was still in charge of the appointment and removal of officials of the 3rd rank and above. The emperor called himself Yu and issued an edict Ji. Every day, he would sit in Wuda Palace Hall and listen to the affairs of the court. It wasn't that Li Longji's faction didn't notice Princess Taiping's strange actions. However, because the emperor emeritus favored Taiping, Li Longji had to consider his father's feelings and couldn't make up his mind to deal with his aunt. The new prime minister, Liu Youqiu, who had relied on Li Longji's support to ascend the throne, had failed to obtain permission to remonstrate several times. Thus, he wanted to execute Taiping and purge the emperor's side, creating an established fact. Presumably, he was wholeheartedly thinking for the Son of Heaven. After the matter was completed, the Son of Heaven wouldn't blame him. Thus, Lu Youqiu secretly met with the right Yulin General Zhang Wei and discussed mobilizing a group of Yulin guards to attack Princess Taiping's residence. As long as Princess Taiping died, the Taiping party would naturally collapse. Unexpectedly, Zhang Wei didn't keep this matter a secret. After getting drunk, he actually leaked the plan to imperial censor Deng Guangbin. Deng Guangbin had recently been in close contact with Princess Taiping's residence. Lu Youqiu was shocked when he heard the news. In a panic, he could only seek help from Li Longji. Li Longji, who had just become the Son of Heaven, was also extremely panic-stricken when he heard the news. Helplessly, he could only seek an audience with his father and tell him the truth. Li Dan was furious when he heard the news. All along, for the sake of glory, splendor, wealth, and rank, the lower ranks instigated the members of the imperial family to kill each other. Li Dan deeply abhorred this. He didn't think that this Lu Youqiu would also do something like alienating the flesh and blood of the imperial family. This was simply preposterous. Li Dan immediately ordered Lu Youqiu, Zhang Wei, and the others to be arrested and imprisoned. All the participants were to be executed. Li Longji couldn't bear to kill Lu Youqiu, so he pleaded with Li Dan. He listed Lu Youqiu's achievements in killing Empress Wei and establishing his father as the emperor. After much consideration, Li Dan pardoned Lu Youqiu alone and exiled him to Fengzhou, Guangdong's Fengkai County. Li Dan's resolute decision prevented Princess Taiping from taking the opportunity to make trouble for him. However, after hearing this, Princess Taiping also felt a great sense of crisis. Today, there was a Lu Youqiu who tried to send troops to destroy her entire family. Who knew that tomorrow there would be another Zhao Youqiu and Sun Youqiu who would repeat the same trick. Princess Taiping immediately secretly made an appointment with Dou Huaizhen, Xiao Zhizhong, Sun Shi, and several other prime ministers, as well as the left Yulin General Chang Yuankai, the left Yulin General Li Xi, the left Yulin General Li Qin, as well as the Crown Prince's junior protector Xueji, Yongzhou's chief scholar Wang Jin, and Hu Sung Hui Fan. Although Cui Shi was also part of Taiping's party, he had too many subordinates. His character could not be trusted. Therefore, Princess Taiping had always been suspicious of and used him. Therefore, he was excluded. After a round of discussion, they initially decided to poison the emperor. This way, they could complete the succession of the emperor with the least amount of chaos. However, the people around Li Long were originally brought by the Prince of Linzi. They could not infiltrate them in such a short time. Moreover, the situation was very urgent. Therefore, they decided to use force instead. Another coup in the Tang dynasty was about to begin. At this time, Li Longji still knew nothing about Princess Taiping's actions. Although he had already seen his aunt's yearning for power, in his opinion, his aunt only wanted to support a relatively weak emperor to ensure her position. He had never thought that his aunt had the ambition to become the emperor and would brazenly decide to use force. Since the incident with Lu Youqiu, Li Longji had repeatedly strictly restrained his subordinates. He was also courteous to Taiping. He did not want to incite his aunt's anger and incite Taiping's party to go against him. Once he ascended the throne, he would cause the country to deteriorate. However, his concession did not result in reconciliation. Taiping had already made up her mind. Who in the world could stop her? On this day, Assistant Minister of the Secretariat Wang Ju returned from a banquet and returned to his residence. He had someone prepare hot water and was taking a bath when suddenly there was a few knocks on the door. The housekeeper of the Wang residence, Old Yao, reported from outside the door. Lang, someone has suddenly sent in a letter from the front yard. The letter clearly states that it is to be opened by Lang personally. This old servant does not dare to act without permission. Oh, bring it in. Wang Ju was very puzzled, and had the old housekeeper bring the letter in. She saw that the letter was wrinkled and looked like it had been wrapped in stone before. On the envelope were the words for Assistant Minister Wang. Wang Ju opened the letter in astonishment and immediately turned pale with fright. She jumped out of the bathtub with a tung sound, but her feet slipped and she almost fell. The housekeeper hurriedly rushed forward to support him and asked in surprise, Lang, what happened to you? Wang Ju's face turned green. Without a word, he broke into a run naked. The housekeeper anxiously called out from behind, Lang, you have not put on your clothes. Oh. Wang Ju suddenly came to his senses and hurriedly turned around. Quickly help me change. Wang Ju had no time to summon the maids to serve him and had the housekeeper help him quickly put on his clothes. Not caring whether his clothes were neat or not, he hurriedly said, Quickly prepare the horse. A moment later, Wang Ju rode a fine horse and rushed out of the Wang residence with 4 attendants, heading like a gust of wind for the imperial palace. In a small alley on the opposite side, an old man in linen robes had his hands behind his back and seemed to be taking a leisurely stroll. Seeing Wang Ju hurriedly leave the residence, the old man in linen robes smiled slightly and quietly disappeared. A letter was spread out in front of Li Longji's imperial desk. Li Longji stared at the wrinkled letter in a daze, his eyes suddenly brimming with tears. To the side, Wang Ju said in surprise, It is not impossible. Why is His Majesty so sorrowful? Li Longji was full of resentment. I don't understand. Why does Aunt treat me like this? Just why? Father only has this one sister. If I harm her, I'm afraid Father will be sad. I have been enduring silently, but she has put a butcher's knife to my neck. What should I do? What should I do? At this point, Li Longji fiercely punched the table, causing an inkstone to fly up and fall to the ground, shattering into pieces. At this time, Zhang Shuo, Cui Riyong, Wei Shigu, Wang Maozhong, and a group of trusted ministers had all rushed over after receiving Li Longji's summons. Li Longji showed them the secret letter. After reading it, everyone's expression changed. The letter stated that Princess Taiping would raise troops to revolt on the 4th day of the 7th month. At that time, Li Yuankai and Li Xi would lead the Yulin Guard to break into the Wuda Hall to kill the emperor. Dou Huaizhen, Xiao Zhizhong, Sun Shi, and the other prime ministers would come to the southern office and use their power to control the southern office's guards to respond. The contents were very detailed. Zhang Shuo asked in surprise, Your Majesty, where did this letter come from? Who reported it? Is the situation true? Wang Ju continued, Master Zhang, this letter was sent to my residence by someone, but I don't know who it was. However, the plans in this letter are very clear and can't be doubted. Furthermore, tomorrow is the 4th day. Just now, Your Majesty had already sent people to investigate. Li Yuankai wasn't supposed to be on duty tomorrow, but he used the excuse that he had to take a leave of absence in a few days and had already switched shifts with someone else. In the past 2 days, the prime ministers have also visited the southern office many times. Zhang Shuo's expression changed. In that case, the situation is urgent. Your Majesty should make a decision as soon as possible. Li Longji was still hesitant. Cui Riyong persuaded. Princess Taiping is already on the verge of rebelling. When Your Majesty was the crown prince, you had a righteous cause, so no one dared to harm Your Majesty. Now that Your Majesty has ascended to the throne, Princess Taiping actually has the intention to rebel. Your Majesty only needs to give a decree, and who in the world would dare to disobey? Why are you so hesitant? Li Longji said dejectedly, You guys don't know. High Emperor has deep feelings for Taiping. It's easy to kill Taiping's rebels, but I'm just worried that it will alarm High Emperor and make him sad. Chui Riyong stomped his feet and said, "Your Majesty is muddle-headed. Wouldn't High Emperor be sad if your Majesty was killed by Princess Taiping? The filial piety of the Emperor lies in the stability of the four seas. I earnestly request your Majesty to immediately give a decree to control the North Gate Imperial Guards before subduing the rebels." Li Longji hesitated for a moment before saying, Let's wait a little longer. Quickly invite my four brothers over to discuss this matter." Before Li Longji ascended to the throne, he had already brought his two elder brothers back to the capital. Now, the four brothers were all in the capital. The fourth and fifth brothers were in charge of the East Palace Guards, while Li Qingqi and Li Qingyi were the great generals of the left and right Palace Guards, respectively. Not long later, the four brothers arrived one after another. After reading the letter, Li Longji said hesitantly, "Brothers, I, San Lang, am not an indecisive and cowardly person. It's just that the person who wants to rebel isn't an ordinary person. I'm worried that if I deal with Aunt, it will make Father sad, which is why I can't make up my mind. What do you guys think I should do?" Li Qingqi sneered. "San Lang, you don't want Father to be sad. When Taiping starts, Father will inevitably be sad. If Taiping can do it, why can't we? Do you want the story of Zetian to repeat itself in the current dynasty? Do you want us brothers' families to be destroyed and Li Tang's royal family to suffer another calamity?" Li Qingyi, Li Longfan, and the rest also rubbed their palms together. "San Lang, if you don't make a decision, you'll end up in trouble. You are a hero of the present age. So why are you being so soft-hearted? Let's make our move. The first to make the move has the advantage, and the last to make the move will suffer." Seeing the four brothers speaking in unison, Li Longji's wavering heart gradually calmed down. Killing intent filled his eyes. "All right. You are heartless and I'll be unjust. Let's make our move now." Chapter 12:16. When a baby tiger pounced on its prey, it would not approach and observe carefully like a mature tiger, looking for the best opportunity to make a fatal pounce. It would make its move when it wanted to pounce on its prey. In reality, Li Longji did not have much time to think because Princess Taiping was about to make her move. He had to respond immediately. In the afternoon of the next day, Li Longji was still in the hall of martial virtue dealing with government affairs. It was quiet outside the Golden Hall. In the spacious and empty palace, people rarely moved under the scorching sun. There were only a few soldiers standing listlessly by the stone steps, hoping that the sun would quickly move to the west and let the shadow of the palace shine over. Bang! A loud noise suddenly came from afar. By the time it reached here, it was already not loud, but a drowsy palace guard holding a halberd still heard the noise. He squinted his eyes in surprise and looked into the distance against the glaring sunlight. He was surprised to find that the gate of martial virtue was actually closed, because the retired emperor was still in the hall of Taiji. The emperor was in charge of government affairs in the side hall, the hall of martial virtue. This gate of martial virtue was originally a side door, but now, like the gate of heaven, it had become a path that all the civil and military officials had to pass to go to court every day. Therefore, it was usually not closed. It was now afternoon, and the court had long been dismissed. However, the emperor was still reading memorials in the hall of martial virtue. There were often officials from various departments going in and out. Therefore, the gate of martial virtue was still open and would only be closed when the palace gates were closed. Before he could come to his senses, he saw hundreds of soldiers with shining swords and spears charging in from the gate of martial virtue. The ones charging at the front were the Yulin General Chang Yuankai and Li Xi, who were guarding the gate of martial virtue today. This palace guard shivered, and his hair all stood on end. Rebellion! Someone is rebelling. This palace guard was scared out of his wits. He immediately ran towards the hall of martial virtue. He ran along the long stone steps for more than 100 steps, but before he could rush into the main hall, he heard an orderly battle cry. He hurriedly turned his head and saw that the door between the hall of Taiji and the hall of martial virtue, the gate of Chiehua, which was usually closed, suddenly opened. An orderly group of imperial guards charged out from the gate of Chiehua and intercepted the rebel army. It was obvious that this sudden army was well prepared. Their formation was neat, and all of them wore leather armor. The brown armor and bright red helmet tassels formed a sharp spear that pierced towards the snake-like rebel army. There were about 300 people in the rebel army, and they were rushing toward the martial virtue hall with all their might. Because some of them ran fast and some of them ran slow, the entire army was dragged into a messy line. There was no formation to speak of. When this army that suddenly appeared out of nowhere rushed in, they were quickly inserted, cut off, and surrounded. This palace guard was stunned for a moment before he came to his senses. He was about to run into the palace to warn when a tsunami of shouts suddenly sounded from the direction of the hall of martial virtue. Countless brightly armored imperial guards swarmed out like a tide from the main gate, side gate, pillars, and gable walls. They came from the back of the hall of martial virtue and the rear hall. This palace guard was stunned and stood there in a daze. He saw the first batch of guards rush out, and they rushed all the way to the 7th stone step before suddenly stopping. Their long halberds pointed forward in an orderly fashion. Behind them, countless soldiers quickly swarmed over and covered the stone steps behind them as well as the ground above them, forming a steel spear formation made up of armor and large halberds. It was dense and strong like a mountain. A young and tall eunuch stood in front of the troops with a sword in his hand. This palace guard recognized him. That person was the inner palace eunuch Gao Lisher. Eunuch Gao, who was extremely favored by the emperor. On the wide and flat square between the gate of martial virtue and the hall of martial virtue, the rebel army that had been cut into two by the soldiers from Qianhua sect were fighting desperately. Suddenly, they realized that countless soldiers had rushed out of the hall of martial virtue to protect it. Their resistance immediately stopped in shock. Everyone was stunned. At this point, who didn't understand that the emperor was already prepared? Gao Lisher took 2 steps forward with a murderous look on his face. He shouted in a stern voice, "The saint has ordered. Chang Yuankai and Li Siyai are plotting against the emperor. Kill without mercy. All of you soldiers have been deceived. Those who immediately abandon their weapons and surrender will not be punished." Chang Yuankai's face was pale. He held his saber and shouted, "Brothers, don't listen to his nonsense. As long as we rush into the hall of martial virtue." Boom, boom, boom. Before Chang Yuankai could finish speaking, there was suddenly a violent sound of the ground being pounded. The ground trembled, startling him so much that he stopped speaking. He quickly turned his head to look. With just one glance, the light in his eyes immediately shrank to the size of a needle. As far as the eye could see, there was no end to it. The dense forest of spears was like a mountain. Innumerable Yulin guards covered the entire palace like flowing lava. With every step they took, the earth trembled. In front of such a dense formation of spears and sabers, wherever the army came, men and horses would be crushed. There was nothing that could stop them. The only choice was to hope for the wind and escape. However, did they have a way out? The gate of martial virtue behind them was already locked. On the right was a tall and thick palace wall. In front was the hall of martial virtue. However, below the steps of the hall were also endless imperial soldiers, protecting the palace impenetrably. Even if they fought to the last drop of blood, could they kill their way in? Wang Maozhong, clad in radiant armor, walked majestically in front of the endless army. He waved his saber and shouted, "Disarm and you will be spared." The countless imperial guards behind him didn't say a word. They only used their uniformed footsteps and the murderous aura that caused the entire palace to tremble to cheer for their general. Clang! It was unknown who dropped his weapon, but immediately after, there was the sound of weapons hitting the ground. Many of the soldiers who had abandoned their weapons were so frightened that their faces turned pale. They lay on the ground and trembled, not daring to raise their heads. Chang Yuankai and Li Xiai looked at each other, their eyes filled with despair. The two prime ministers, Xiao Zhizhong and Sun Shi, attempted to imitate Zhang Jianji's actions in the past. They used the prime minister's seal to write an official document for mobilizing troops and rushed to the southern Yamen. After the two prime ministers broke into the southern Yamen, they immediately beat the drums and gathered the generals. They loudly announced, "The emperor intends to kill the retired emperor." The retired emperor orders the prime minister to mobilize troops to the southern Yamen. After Xiao Zhizhong finished speaking, all the generals in the tent stood solemnly without a word of doubt. Xiao Zhizhong and Sun Shi thought that this lie had fooled the generals and secretly exchanged glances. Sun Shi grabbed the arrow of command and shouted, "The right Thousand Ox Guards General Lin Hai, come forward and listen to the order." The tent was quiet and no one answered. Sun Shi frowned and swept his eyes over the generals in the tent. He shouted, "Where is the right Thousand Ox Guards General Lin Hai?" The generals in the tent looked straight ahead and still did not say a word. Xiao Zhizhong asked, curiously, "Lin Hai did not arrive on time? Where is the left Guards General Guanu?" The dozens of generals in the tent were still standing straight like mountains and still did not say a word. Xiao Zhizhong and Sun Shi's expressions gradually changed. Xiao Zhizhong forced himself to calm down, but he could not suppress the trembling in his voice. He pointed at a person and asked, Which Guards General are you from? Tell me your name." The general that he pointed at looked like he was made of iron, but his face did not change at all. He calmly looked forward as if he did not hear Xiao Zhizhong's words and did not see him. At this time, a burst of laughter came from behind the tent. Xiao Zhizhong and Sun Shi hurriedly turned around and saw a young general wearing a helmet and armor with a long sword at his side. He walked out from the tent valiantly and was surrounded by a dozen burly warriors. Xiao Zhizhong and Sun Shi's faces turned ashen when they saw this person and cried out in shock, "King Song!" Li Qingqi's smile vanished, and he shouted sternly, "Men, behead these two traitors who have deceived the emperor and rebelled against their superiors." A group of wolf-like and tiger-like soldiers immediately rushed forward. Regardless of whether they were the courteous prime ministers or not, they raised their steel sabers and blood splattered everywhere. The two prime ministers were slaughtered like pigs on the spot. At this time, Dou Huaizhen was still sitting in the political affairs hall. Initially, he wanted to wait for the two sides to succeed before sitting in the political affairs hall to issue fake edicts and quickly pacify the situation. However, he did not expect that before he could wake up from his sweet dream, the military parade in front of the Martial Virtue Hall had reached his ears. Dou Huaizhen knew that the matter had been exposed, and he hurriedly opened the back window and escaped. At this time, the entire palace was on high alert. How could they possibly escape? If Li Longji hadn't been worried that they would be alerted in the beginning, and if it wasn't for the fact that he wasn't afraid that they would escape from the palace once the attack was launched, Dou Huaizhen wouldn't even be able to escape from the political affairs hall. Dou Huaizhen fled in panic and dived into a drainage ditch. Seeing the muddy water rolling away, he did not know how to swim, nor did he know how long the underground waterway was, or how many hidden iron bars were along the way to prevent people from sneaking in. In despair, He took off his belt and hanged himself on a sluice gate. At the same time, Li Longfan, Li Longya, and a few of Li Longji's trusted generals each led a group of imperial guards to arrest Wang Jin, Cui Shi, Hui Fan, Jia Yingfu, Li Yu, and the other members of the Taiping party. Li Dan heard the movement of the army from Taiji Palace and hurriedly climbed the gate of heaven to take a look. Seeing the army gathered at the Martial Virtue Hall, he could not help but turn pale with fright. He quickly summoned the Minister of War, Guo Yuanjin, to see him. Guo Yuanjin had already been informed by Li Longji in advance and knew the entire plan. As soon as he saw Li Dan, he immediately bowed and said, "Don't be alarmed, retired emperor. This is a rebellion by Prime Minister Dou Huaijin and the others. The emperor is currently mobilizing troops to suppress the rebellion and was afraid that the retired emperor would be worried, so he did not report it in advance. Now, the masterminds of the rebellion have been executed." Li Dan was stunned. Dou Huaijin and the others rebelled. Thinking about it, Li Dan suddenly turned pale with fright. Since there were people who rebelled and betrayed the current emperor, they must have someone else to support. Who would Dou Huaijin support? He was the prime minister recommended by Ling Yu. Could it be that San Lang was mobilizing troops to make a move against his aunt? Li Dan flew into a rage and shouted, "Where is San Lang? Quickly summon him to see me." At this time, Li Longji had just arrived at the gate of heaven. As the son of a noble family, Li Longji only needed to create a false impression that he was at the Martial Virtue Hall. Why would he personally act as bait? As soon as he saw Li Dan, Li Longji immediately knelt on the ground and said, "Father, this son did not inform Imperial Father in advance of the capture of the rebels and alarmed Imperial Father. This son has sinned." Li Dan's face was ashen as he said in a deep voice, "San Lang, what do you want to do to your aunt?" Li Longji saw that his father had already guessed that Princess Taiping was involved and did not hide it. He smiled bitterly and said, "Imperial Father, it is not that this son wants to do to my aunt, but what my aunt wants to do to this son. Imperial Father, please take a look." He took out the informant letter from his bosom and presented it to Li Dan. Li Dan was dispirited as he read it and was speechless for a long time. Although he had deep feelings for his sister Taiping, he loved his son just as much. Now that his sister wanted to kill his son, and his son wanted to deal with his sister, what else could he say? After a long time, Li Dan asked in a trembling voice, "Then, how do you plan to deal with your aunt?" Seeing the tears in his father's eyes, Li Longji's heart trembled. He did not dare to meet his father's eyes again, and could only lower his head. He replied in a low voice, "Father, I'm afraid. I can't deal with my aunt now." Li Dan's heart tightened, and he hurriedly asked, "Why is that?" Li Longji replied in a low voice, "Because the one leading the troops to Princess Taiping's residence is my second brother." Li Dan's heart immediately sank. Among his 5 sons, Li Qingyi was the one who did things the most without scruples. If it was Li Qingqi, Li Longfan, or Li Longya, they might have some scruples because of Taiping's identity. However, Li Qingyi was different. He respected his father and loved his siblings, but he did not have the same deep feelings for his relatives. Li Dan turned around in a daze and walked over to the city walls with heavy steps. Leaning against the wall, he gazed in the direction of the Princess Taiping residence. Tears streamed down his face as he muttered to himself, "Lingwei, you're no longer here?" Chapter 12:17. When the situation in the palace had just stabilized, and the imperial soldiers and cavalry were out in all directions to arrest the members of the Taiping party, Li Qingyi was the first to set off with about 500 imperial soldiers under his command. His target was Princess Taiping herself. Li Longji had given his second brother a lot of thought before sending him to Princess Taiping's residence. With Princess Taiping's power and the emperor's love for her, no civil or military official dared to raise a butcher's knife against Princess Taiping. Even the royal brothers and Li Longji himself couldn't bear to do so. Only Li Qingyi was an exception. Li Qingqi also understood San Lang's painstaking efforts. In a life-and-death struggle for power, there was no room for soft-heartedness and laughable fantasies. Today's benevolence would be the root of the disaster that would destroy his family and clan in the future. He also understood that San Lang was shouldering even more things and had even more things to worry about, so he was willing to be the bad guy. The saying "brothers in war" was fully interpreted by Li Longji and his brothers. Princess Taiping wanted to remove Li Longji from the throne and support a weak prince as a puppet. When the time was right, she would force him to abdicate the throne and give up the country. She didn't know that the 5 brothers were of one mind and would not be divided by her. Today, in order to protect Li Longji's throne, the 4 brothers went into battle together, and Li Longji handed over the military power to them without the slightest suspicion. Li Qingyi rushed to Princess Taiping's residence with his troops and saw a few servants of the Princess Taiping's residence running inside in panic to report the news. He said with a murderous look, "Kill them, except for Xue Chongjian's family. Kill Taiping's family and Taiping herself." The 500 imperial soldiers received the prince's clear order. With a shout, they rushed into Princess Taiping's residence. Swords and knives flashed, and the sound of killing shook the sky. The relationship between Xue Chongjian and Li Sanlang was not shallow. Not only had he assisted Li Longji in killing Empress Wei, he had also become close friends with Li Longji due to their similar temperaments. Although Li Longji understood the principle of cutting weeds and eliminating the roots, he was ultimately unable to use any ambitious and ruthless methods. Before Li Qingyi sent out his troops, he had specially instructed him to protect Xue Chongjian and his family. The news that the imperial army had gone to various places in the capital to arrest the Taiping party members quickly reached Yang Fan's ears. At this time, Yang Fan was stepping on lotus roots at Longqing Lake with his sons. He was bare-chested and wearing a pair of snub-nosed pants. He led his 2 older sons, Yang Nianzu and Yang Ji, into the shallow waters that were waist-deep. His bare feet could easily feel the fat lotus roots in the mud. He held his breath and sank into the water. Then he could dig out the mud and pull out the round lotus roots. The mud had a strong suction, so it was not easy to pull the lotus out of the water in one piece. They would only break the section that they touched, instead of digging out a whole one. The 2 younger sons were shouting on the shore as they cleaned up the fat lotus roots that their father and brother had dug up. They excitedly brought them to their sisters. The sisters squatted by the lake and carefully washed away the mud that was still wrapped around the lotus roots with the lake water. At this time, the news came. Yang Fan turned pale with fright. He immediately rushed to the shore, grabbed the horse of the informant, and galloped away. Yang Fan was wearing a pair of wet, snub-nosed pants. He stepped on the stirrups with his bare feet and whipped like rain. It had never occurred to him that Princess Taiping and Li Longji would publicly break off their relationship and meet each other in arms so soon. According to common sense, the political struggle between the 2 sides should have been a long process of wrestling. How could they enter the final battle so hastily? By the time the horse arrived at Princess Taiping's mansion, Yang Fan's trousers were already dry, and the mud on his bare feet had already congealed into clumps. When he landed on the ground, the clumps of mud shattered on the stone steps of Princess Taiping's mansion. "Stop, who are you?" The 12 or so soldiers guarding the gate of Princess Taiping's mansion pointed their sharp spears at Yang Fan and asked in a stern voice. The search and massacre in Princess Taiping's mansion had not ended yet. Yang Fan saw the bodies of several family servants lying in a pool of blood in the courtyard toward the mansion. He could not help but feel his heart tighten. He shouted in a stern voice, "I am the Defender General who supports the state, Yang Fan. Get out of the way." Most of these dozen or so imperial guards had never seen Yang Fan. Although there were a few seasoned soldiers among them who had seen Yang Fan before, they had only seen him from afar in the army, so they could not clearly see General Yang's appearance. In addition, Yang Fan's hair was tied into bundles, his upper body was bare, his feet were bare, and he was only wearing a pair of pants. His appearance and temperament were very different from the General Yang in their minds. It was really difficult to tell who he was. The soldiers could not help but hesitate. Yang Fan could not wait for them to call the officer to identify him. He was burning with anxiety, seeing the soldiers hesitating, but still not giving way. His motionless body abruptly crashed to the side. He went through the gap between two spears. Two soldiers flew more than a zhang away. With two spears in his hands, Yang Fan's arms made a circle and shook. The soldiers felt numb in their hands and could no longer hold the spears in their hands. 7 or 8 spears flew into the air. Yang Fan rushed in with 2 spears in his hands. Another few soldiers with spears chased after him in shock and shouted, "Stop him! Someone is forcing his way in." Yang Fan could not bear to kill people. He rushed in and only cared about knocking away their weapons or sweeping them away. Hearing the news, more and more soldiers came to surround him. Yang Fan could not be ruthless and could not break out of the encirclement. He was trapped at the entrance of the second courtyard. At this moment, a brigade commander who came to help recognized Yang Fan and exclaimed in shock, "General, why are you here?" Yang Fan held 2 spears in his hands. His eyes narrowed as he said, "You know me?" The brigade commander knelt down on one knee with a saber in his hand and said respectfully, "I am a veteran of 1,000 cavalries." Yang Fan suddenly understood and asked anxiously, "How is the princess now?" He was afraid to hear the news that Tai Ping had been killed, but he had to ask because he was worried. His voice trembled as he asked. The brigade commander answered, "Princess Tai Ping is not in the Fu. We are also in the midst of searching." When Yang Fan heard this, his heart relaxed. At this time, Li Qingyi walked out of the rear residence under the escort of a group of soldiers. Beside him was Xue Chongjian. Xue Chongjian's face was pale, and his eyes were lifeless. Even though his relationship with his brothers was extremely indifferent, but seeing their entire families being massacred still had a strong impact on him. "General Yang?" When Li Qingyi saw Yang Fan, he couldn't help but be startled. Yang Fan had purposely concealed his role in killing Empress Wei. This matter was known by very few people, but Li Qingyi was very clear about it. Because of this, Li Qingyi had always regarded Yang Fan as one of his own. Now, seeing Yang Fan dressed like this, holding a pair of spears in his hands and opposing his soldiers, he couldn't help but be astounded. When Yang Fan knew that Tai Ping wasn't around, the anxiety in his heart lessened, and he regained some rationality. He hurriedly thought of a reason and threw away his spear. He cupped his hands towards Li Qingyi and said, "Prince Yang." Just as he said this, he saw a horse galloping over. The rider on the horse was wearing a eunuch's robe. He actually did not get off the horse when he barged in from the door of the Fu. He raised a roll of yellow silk high up in his hand and shouted loudly, "Spare the knife! Spare the knife! High Emperor has ordered, do not harm Princess Tai Ping." In Mount Zhongnan, there was a Zen temple that wasn't big but had an extremely elegant environment. This Zen temple was funded by Princess Tai Ping and could be considered a family temple. The memorial tablet of her husband, Xue Xiao, was enshrined in the temple. In order to ascend to the throne, Empress Wu Zetian had used the heads of countless people as her stepping stones to ascend to the throne step by step. Xue Xiao's head was also one of the stepping stones. Taiping had always felt guilty for Xue Xiao's tragic death and being unable to save him. Therefore, she built this Zen temple to pray for his salvation. At this moment, Princess Taiping was in this Zen temple. The mountain temple originally didn't accept incense offerings from outsiders, so it was quiet and elegant. At this moment, it was abnormally quiet. In the courtyard, the water was clear, the trees were green, and the rugged mountain rocks made it look like a paradise. Princess Taiping sat on a square rock, and beside her stood the internal and external stewards, as well as a few trusted aides. Princess Taiping's face was pale, and her eyes were filled with tears. External steward Li Yi had just sent news from the city. When she heard that the entire Fu had been slaughtered, and other than Xue Chongjian's son, wife, and son, everyone else like Xue Chongshuan had been executed, even someone as unyielding as her couldn't help but cry. After planning today's operation, she hid here. On one hand, she wanted to draw a clear line between herself and the mutiny. After everything was done, the chancellors would bring her back to the city to preside over the overall situation. On the other hand, she also considered that if the plan failed, as long as she wasn't around with the relationship between Princess Taiping's Fu and the imperial family, she believed that her family wouldn't be implicated. It was a pity that she was wrong. Sen Lang, I've underestimated you. Underestimated you. Princess Taiping smiled sadly, and 2 lines of tears rolled down her face. She had underestimated Li Longji's determination. Li Longji had always been weak and tolerant towards her. In fact, it wasn't because he was afraid of her, but because he was worried about his own father. Princess Taiping had always been smart, but she had misjudged this matter. Now, not only had she failed to accomplish her mission, but she had also harmed the lives of her entire family. Princess Taiping's heart was in great pain. Li Yi said in fear, "Princess, the emperor has already sent troops here. You'd better leave quickly. The world is so big, there must be a place where you can hide." Princess Taiping's body shook slightly and asked, "How did the emperor know my whereabouts so quickly?" Li Yi lowered his head and didn't speak. Princess Taiping slowly turned around and stared at him. Li Yi's knees suddenly went soft, and he knelt in front of her. He said in a trembling voice, "I don't know." Princess Taiping smiled faintly and said, "You're afraid that I'll be sad if you tell me, right?" She closed her eyes and slowly opened them again. Her eyes were cold and emotionless. "It was Chong Jian who betrayed his mother, isn't it?" Li Yi banged his head on the ground until his forehead was dripping with blood. He didn't answer Princess Taiping's question. Princess Taiping said faintly, "Even though the emperor will find me sooner or later, I really don't want my own son to betray me." Li Yi cried loudly. Princess Taiping looked at him and said softly, "Ever since I married the emperor's son-in-law at the age of 16, you've been serving me by my side. You've followed me for many years. You are very good." She looked at the internal steward Zhoumin, whose face was full of tears, and said, "And you're also very good. Now, all of you run for your lives. As long as I'm dead, the emperor won't make things difficult for you." Zhoumin knelt down on the ground and wailed loudly, "Regardless of life or death, I want to follow the princess and serve the princess." Princess Taiping was furious and said sternly, "Bastard, get out of my sight immediately. Don't let me see you again. Get out." Li Yi and Zhoumin wailed loudly and refused to get up. Seeing that the princess was furious, they hurriedly got up and left the courtyard, but they still stood far away. Princess Taiping heaved a sigh of relief and turned around to face a pond of green water. Other than herself, there was a lonely figure in the water. Princess Taiping stared at the figure in the water and said slowly, "Taiping trusted Mr. so much. Why did Mr. deliberately harm me?" Chapter 1218. Mr. Rameau smiled and calmly said, So your Royal Highness has already understood? Princess Taiping clenched her fists and tried to keep herself calm. Everyone only knew what he was going to do. Only you knew the overall plan. However, the Emperor's every action against me was accurate. At this time, how could I not know that it was you who leaked the secret? Mr. Mo chuckled. Princess Taiping angrily asked, "Why are you still with me? Do you think I don't dare to kill you?" Mr. Mo stood there in a trance, as if his mind had drifted far away. After a long time, he sighed softly and muttered to himself, "Why should I go? I want to see you die with my own eyes. It's a pity that my carefully planned plan for many years did not completely succeed." Princess Taiping's eyes looked like they were about to spit fire. "You destroyed my family, and you still say that it was not a great success." "Of course not." Mr. Mo's handsome face suddenly became ferocious. His eyes were filled with hatred and resentment. "You are a noble princess, and the Emperor Emeritus dotes on you. Other than instigating you to rebel, I can't think of any other way to ruin your family. Now, you finally rebelled. What's hateful is that Xue Chongjian is still alive, and your family has not died. I can't accept this. I really can't accept this." Mr. Mo's voice was sobbing, like the cry of a wronged soul from the underworld. It was filled with incomparable despair and resentment, which made Princess Taiping involuntarily take a step back. Her hair stood on end. "Why? What kind of hatred do I have for you? Why do you hate me so much?" "Because I am from the Peach Blossom Village. Your Royal Highness, do you remember that place?" Mr. Mo laughed crazily. "Ha ha ha. I think your Highness doesn't remember, right? That small mountain village, that group of insignificant people, in the eyes of Princess Taiping, are like ants. How could you care about them?" "Ha!" Princess Taiping's face suddenly changed, and she said in horror, "Peach Blossom Village? You are from the Peach Blossom Village? Did Yang Fan and you join hands to kill me?" Mr. Mo's smile disappeared, and he said strangely, "Yang Fan? What does this have to do with General Yang?" Princess Taiping's face also showed a strange expression. "You don't know that he is also from the Peach Blossom Village?" Mo Yuhan was surprised at first, then overjoyed. Just as he was about to ask for clarification, a figure suddenly leaped over the short wall of the temple like a bird. The 8 female sumo wrestlers who were scattered around immediately rushed over. Princess Taiping saw that the person who suddenly rushed in was Yang Fan. She couldn't help but shout, "Let him come over." At this time, the 8 female sumo wrestlers also clearly saw Yang Fan's face and quickly retreated. Yang Fan quickly rushed to Princess Taiping's side and hurriedly said, "Princess, the Emperor has made his move. Your family has already—" Princess Taiping interrupted. "You don't need to say anything. I already know about this matter." Yang Fan said, "The Imperial Court's army is rushing over here. Due to the Emperor Emeritus's interference, I believe the Emperor won't suddenly have the intention to kill you. However, it's still hard to predict what his decision will be. It's best for you to hide for now and wait until—" Princess Taiping laughed out loud. "Avoid? Why should I avoid it? Where can I go to avoid it? I have already lost, and I have nothing but dignity. Do you want me to throw away my dignity to that kid?" At this time, Mr. Mo slowly walked up, looked at Yang Fan with a strange look, and slowly asked, "General Yang? You are from the Peach Blossom Village?" Yang Fan didn't know how long it had been since he heard this name. Suddenly hearing Mr. Mo say it, he couldn't help but be shocked. He looked at Mr. Mo in surprise, not knowing how to respond. Seeing his expression, Mr. Mo couldn't help but become excited. "Are you really from the Peach Blossom Village? What's your name, and whose child are you?" Yang Fan's heart couldn't help but tremble. He had already realized that the old man in front of him was probably from the same place as him. Yang Fan suppressed his excitement and replied, "My surname is Xiang. The villagers call me Achou. Old man, who are you?" Mr. Mo's body shook, and his eyes widened as he looked at Yang Fan. 2 lines of tears instantly blurred his eyes, and he choked with sobs. "Achou, so you are Achou, so you are still alive. He. Achou, so you are still alive." Mr. Mo was so excited that he almost couldn't stand still. Yang Fan supported him and eagerly asked, "Uncle, you are?" Mo Yuhan said with tears in his eyes, "Achou, do you still remember the Mo family who lives in the east of the village? Do you still remember your sister Xiuxiu? I am Xiuxiu's father, your Uncle Mo." Ever since he was young, Yang Fan would address the elders in the village as uncles, and it was impossible for a junior to call them by their surnames. Even if Mo Yuhan said his real name, Yang Fan wouldn't have any impression of him. However, when he mentioned the Mo family in the east of the village and Sister Xiuxiu who played with him when he was young, Yang Fan suddenly remembered. Yang Fan's eyes immediately welled up with tears of excitement, and he said happily, "Uncle Mo, so you are also alive." Mr. Mo's tears continued to flow. "That's right, I'm still alive." That day, I left the village to make arrangements for Sister Xiuxiu's marriage. Fortunately, I managed to escape. When I returned, the entire village was gone. Everyone was dead. My pitiful daughter, who had to depend on each other for survival. Mr. Mo suddenly turned around, pointed at Princess Taiping, and said with gritted teeth, "Achou, she is the enemy of our whole village. Your parents, your sister, your fellow villagers all died in her hands. Quickly kill her to avenge your parents and the whole village." "What?" Yang Fan was shocked and looked at Princess Taiping in disbelief. Mr. Mo was so excited that his whole body trembled. "Good child, I didn't expect that there would still be people alive in our village besides me. Now that you have become a great general, you have the power to avenge her. Kill her, but don't let her family go. She still has a son alive. You must kill them all, and use the lives of her family to pay for the lives of our whole village." Yang Fan looked at Princess Taiping in horror and shook his head in disbelief. "Impossible! How can she be the murderer of our relatives?" Mr. Mo said loudly, "Why is it impossible? I was lucky to escape death that year, and I hid my identity and fled to another place. Later, I tried every possible means to get close to Prince Cheng, Li Qianli, and became his confidant. When Taiping killed our whole village, Wu Meinyang had not yet become the emperor, and Li Qianli had not yet been driven out of the capital, so he knew a lot of inside stories that no one knew about. Uncle learned the truth from him." Mr. Mo pointed at Princess Taiping and said while gritting his teeth, "She is the murderer who killed your father, mother, sister, Xiu'er, and my whole village." There was no expression on Princess Taiping's face. She had experienced too many shocks today. Her dream had failed, her children and grandchildren were killed, Xue Chongjian had betrayed her mother, the most trusted Mr. Mo had betrayed her, and now she had become the enemy of her lover's father. Who else in the world could endure so many shocks in one day? One thing after another struck her head like a bolt of lightning. She was already numb to it. Yang Fan shook his head with a pale face. "Impossible! Impossible! Why did she kill our relatives? It doesn't make sense. Uncle Mo, you must be mistaken." "I am not mistaken." Mr. Mo sneered at the pale Princess Taiping and said while gritting his teeth, "I know why she killed our whole village. Speaking of which, this matter has a lot to do with you." Yang Fan looked at Mo Yuhan in astonishment. "It has a lot to do with me?" Mr. Mo said, "Yes, she wanted to kill our whole village because she had a grudge with your father. The funny thing is, she killed everyone in our village, but she didn't kill you, the main character. Ha ha, this is God's will, this is God's will. Yang Fan was aghast. Princess and my father have a grudge? How is this possible? Mr. Mo said strangely, Of course there is no grudge between you and your father in the Peach Blossom Village. Xiang Ing is not your biological father, but your adoptive father. In fact, he is just your father's personal bodyguard. Yang Fan was also shocked. He never thought that he would hear such a secret today. He had always thought that his biological father had suddenly become his adoptive father. He actually had another biological father. Hearing Mr. Mo's words, Princess Taiping seemed to have heard the most terrible thing in the world. She looked at Yang Fan in horror, and her body began to tremble like a leaf in a storm. Mr. Mo said, Not only your adoptive father, everyone in our village is your father's subordinates, aides, and closest friends. CH. Oh, you are actually Helan Minji's son. Princess Taiping closed her eyes in pain. She had already guessed this result, but she still had a glimmer of hope in her heart. But this last glimmer of hope had now been shattered. Her life was like a dreamy and bizarre bubble. They all looked so beautiful, but in the end, they all left her with broken endings. Helan Minji, Yang Fan once knew about this person. He even suspected that the destruction of the village had some kind of close relationship with this person. He never thought that he would finally be confirmed today. He never thought that he was actually this person's son. He looked at Mr. Mo sluggishly, unable to make any reaction. Mr. Mo said, Your father was talented and famous in Luoyang. Not only was he the most handsome man in the capital, but he was also the most talented scholar in the capital. When he was just 20 years old, he compiled 100 volumes of 30 Years of Spring and Autumn. It can be said that he was famous in the capital. With his noble background and talent, he had a promising future. Unfortunately, Yang Fan already knew what happened next. Helan Minji's father died early, and his mother Wu Shun was widowed when she was young. Because she was as beautiful as a flower, Emperor Li Ji took a fancy to her and gave her the title of Madam of Han. Wu Meinyang hated her sister for taking away her favor, so she poisoned her sister and killed her. Not long after, Li Ji took a fancy to Wu Shun's daughter Helan Shi, so he gave her the title of Madam of Wei and let her stay in the palace. Wu Meinyang was worried that her niece would take away the emperor's favor, so she poisoned her niece Helan Shi to death. Helan Minji hated Li Ji for being greedy for his mother and sister's beauty, but he was so cowardly that he couldn't protect their lives. He also hated his aunt Wu Meinyang's cruelty and cold-bloodedness, but he didn't have the power to take revenge. So from then on, he became dissolute and went against the imperial family everywhere, especially to make the imperial family look bad. Li Ji and Wu Meinyang chose the daughter of Yang Xijian, the junior minister of imperial guards, to be the crown prince's wife. Helan Minji used his talent and beauty as a weapon to get close to this girl, capture her heart, and occupy her body, causing the imperial family to lose face. He repeatedly challenged Wu Meinyang's bottom line until she couldn't take it anymore and banished him to Lingnan. It was said that on the way, he hanged himself with the reins of a horse, ending his short life. Yang Fan was at a loss. I am Helan Minji's son? My maternal great-grandfather and Taiping's maternal grandfather are the same person? Then she is actually my distant aunt. Chapter 1219. Yang Fan looked at Mr. Mo in disbelief, and then looked at Princess Taiping. He had no reason to doubt Mr. Mo's words, but he still couldn't help but ask Princess Taiping, Is it really you who killed the people of our Peach Blossom Village? Mr. Mo sneered. Of course it was her, because she hated your father, because your father, in order to retaliate against Wu Meinyang, had harmed her. Yang Fan felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He suddenly retreated a few steps, and his face was as pale as paper. Princess Taiping took a deep breath and slowly raised her head. She stared at Yang Fan with eyes full of sorrow. I didn't. Cousin Helan was originally an outstanding person with outstanding appearance and talent. He was a person with a great future, but his mother and elder sister were killed by my mother. He hated my father's cowardice and incompetence, and also hated my mother's cruelty and cold-bloodedness. From then on, he became unrestrained and played around with life, always going against my Li family. The crown princess was also charmed by his charm, and was willing to let him take her virginity. He thought of all kinds of ways to humiliate my Li family. He despised etiquette and hated the Li family. In his view, my father used the power of the emperor to possess his mother and sister, but failed to protect them. My mother was the empress, and also his concubine, but she did not have the heart of a mother, and in order to compete for favor, she killed her own relatives. He wanted to pay her back in her own coin. Once, I went to my aunt's house. At that time, I was only 6 years old, but Cousin Helan wanted to violate me when he was drunk. However, he did not really hurt me. My cries and shouts brought him back to his senses. He used to love me very much, if not for his hatred blinding his eyes. Princess Taiping smiled sadly and said, He let me go, but many people heard my cries. When I escaped with my clothes in disarray, some people also saw it. So, no one would come to ask me the truth, and no one dared to ask, but they had the courage to spread rumors. Princess Taiping slightly raised her head, not letting her tears fall. My cousin committed suicide at the end of the 2nd year of Xianheng, so you should be his posthumous son. However, I was not the one who ordered the massacre of the people of Peach Blossom Village, and the purpose was not to find you. If Mr. Mo did not tell you this secret, no one would ever know. Whether it was me or anyone in the court, no one knew that Cousin Helan had a posthumous son. Mr. Mo snapped. You're lying. Yang Mingsheng, Qiu Shinji, and the others were incited by you to slaughter everyone in the Peach Blossom Village. Even the Empress did not know about this. If it wasn't for the fact that you had been tainted by Helan Minji and bore a grudge against him, if it wasn't for the fact that you knew that he had a posthumous son and wanted to get revenge on his son, why would you incite those people to travel thousands of miles to kill him? Princess Taiping slowly closed her eyes, and tears slowly flowed from the corners of her Mo, and said, Mo, you, I Taiping you to me, I Taiping you, I and you to Xiao. If I was really defiled, would I need to hide it? If I really killed the people of Peach Blossom Village, would I need to hide it? She opened her eyes and contemptuously looked at Mr. Mo. Do you think I'm afraid of death? Do you think I'm afraid that you will kill me? Mr. Mo said in a deep voice, If that's not the case, why did you kill all the people of Peach Blossom Village? Princess Taiping coldly said, I've said it before, it was not my intention, but if you insist that the death of the people of Peach Blossom Village was because of me, it is not an exaggeration. Yang Fan said in a stiff voice, Tell me what is going on. Princess Taiping looked at him deeply and said, In the 1st year of Xianheng, I got married to Prince Consort Xue. She looked at a quiet room in the temple where Xue Xiao's memorial tablet was being enshrined. Princess Taiping stared in that direction, as if she could see Xue Xiao's figure, and slowly said, Xue Xiao loved me, and I also regarded him as my lifelong lover. We were very loving, but not long after we got married, someone spread the rumor that I was defiled by my cousin to his ears. Men would rather believe this kind of thing than not believe it. Even when we were virgins on our wedding night, he refused to believe it. He would rather believe that it was just a trick of mine to deceive him. He still loved me, and he did not dare to vent his anger on me. But he was a man, and he could not tolerate the fact that his woman was defiled by another man. He was filled with jealousy, but what could he do? Cousin Helan was already dead, and even if he wanted to take revenge, he could not find him. However, although Helan is dead, his old subordinates are still there. Taiping withdrew his gaze and slowly glanced at Yang Fan, and Mr. M.O., as a person in a high position, there will always be people who will try to figure out your happiness and anger. They will try to think of ways to make you satisfied. They all believe that I have really been violated. They all believe that Prince Consort's anger is because of me. At that time, my father had just passed away, and my mother was in charge of the country as the Empress Dowager. The world was still under the control of the Li family. As my mother's most beloved daughter, Prince Consort and I were the targets of many people's flattery. So Miao Shinke, Qiu Shinji, Yang Mingsheng, and the others planned this massacre in order to please Prince Consort and me. At that time, Prince Consort Shui was serving as the general of the Fengtian Guards. He secretly mobilized a group of troops, and these people led them to Shaozhou. I didn't know about this until more than half a year later. Mr. Mo listened in a daze. He had been by Taiping's side for all these years, treating her as his greatest enemy. He had always been scheming to kill her, so he had studied her character very thoroughly. He was very clear that with Taiping's proud personality, if she was the one who killed him, she would definitely not deny it, but he did not want to admit this fact. He had racked his brains and spent so many years and finally pushed Princess Taiping into the abyss. He had avenged his deep hatred, and he was very happy in his heart. However, he suddenly learned that his enemy was not this person at all. His real enemy had long since disappeared, and he had actually hurt an innocent person, which he could not accept. Mr. Mo gasped, pointed to Princess Taiping, and said, "You're lying. You must be lying." Helan Minji was safe and sound even though he had defiled the crown princess. If he had not insulted Wu Meinyang's most beloved daughter, how could he have been punished just because Madame Yang passed away? He had embezzled the money for Madame Yang's funeral and drank and had fun during the funeral. Princess Taiping said, lightly, "Anger can be accumulated. My mother knew that she had wronged him. So in the face of his provocation, she endured it once and twice. When she finally couldn't bear it, even a trivial thing was enough to make her furious." Before Mr. Mo could say anything, Princess Taiping had proudly raised her head and said, "Believe it or not, it's up to you. I don't need to lie. If I didn't want to tell Erling the truth, I wouldn't have explained a word to you. I, Taiping, have never been a woman who lives for other people's feelings, and I'm not a woman who lives for other people's gossip." Mr. Mo opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he did not say a word. In fact, he had already believed Taiping's words. His family was long dead. His enemies were also all dead. When he thought that his great vengeance had been avenged, and he was filled with the satisfaction of seeing his enemies beheaded with his own eyes, everything suddenly became a lie. Mr. Mo stood in a daze for a long time, slowly turned around, and walked out with heavy steps. Yang Fan hurriedly said, "Uncle Mo, where are you going?" They were the only two survivors of the Peach Blossom Village. Mr. Mo was already old, so Yang Fan wanted to take care of him for the rest of his life. Mr. Mo said blankly, "The only purpose of this old man's life is to get revenge. Now that I have nothing left to love, I want to become a monk." Yang Fan said, "Uncle Mo." Seeing that Mo Yuhan did not turn around, Yang Fan suddenly said loudly, "I want to let Uncle Mo know that I killed Yang Mingsheng, Qiu Shinji, and Miao Shinke. I have already killed all of my enemies." Mr. Mo paused, looked up to the sky, and laughed. Good boy. Ha ha ha. In the Hall of Sweet Dew, Li Dan said to Li Longji, with tears in her eyes. Sanlang, she is your aunt after all. When I was imprisoned in the Eastern Palace, your aunt spent a lot of effort for our family. Li Longji was so angry that tears fell from his eyes. He said with hatred, "Father, have you seen the secret letter? She wants to kill me. She wants to kill me." Li Dan said in a low voice, "Son, your aunt was confused for a moment. Now that you have killed all of her family members and arrested all of her remaining followers, what else can she do? Spare her life, and I will announce to the world that I will give you the power to appoint and pardon officials above the third rank. From now on, you can live out your old age and no longer care about worldly affairs." Li Longji was so angry that he stomped his feet. "Father, did I force you to hand over the power? Even if you don't want me to be the emperor and want me to return the throne to my eldest brother, I have no complaints. But Taiping cannot be forgiven. If he is not executed for the crime of rebellion, how can he rule the world? Once she makes a comeback one day, she won't be as soft-hearted as you, father." Li Dan said with reddened eyes, "In my life, many of my brothers and sisters have never had a good ending. Now that I only have this sister, how can I bear to see her die a miserable death? Sanlang, do you want me to kneel down and beg you?" Li Dan lifted his sleeves and knelt down. Li Longji turned pale with fright and hurriedly dodged to his father's side to avoid this kneeling. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and begged, "Father, please get up. Don't kill your son." Li Dan said, "Unless you pardon Taiping's death sentence, I won't get up from my kneeling. I will kowtow to you here." Li Dan was about to kowtow to the ground when Li Longji hurriedly said, all right, I agree. Li Dan's eyes lit up. She happily said, "You really agree?" Li Longji was helpless. With a bitter expression, he said, "Forget it. I agree to pardon my aunt's death sentence, but I must imprison her for life. Moreover, I must announce to the world that Taiping has been executed with poisoned wine. From now on, there will only be my sister in the world. Taiping will no longer exist." Li Dan said repeatedly, Yes, I'll do as you say. Son, hurry up and issue the decree." Chapter 12:20. Outside the mountain temple, 3,000 fully armed imperial guards surrounded the small temple so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Spears and halberds were as numerous as a forest, and there were even strong bows and hard crossbows that could sweep the battlefield. No one would be able to break out of such an encirclement. Suddenly, a dozen or so riders galloped over from the distance. Looking at their uniforms, it was a group of imperial guards escorting 2 eunuchs. The imperial guards surrounding the mountain temple became spirited and hurriedly went forward to meet them. A moment later, the imperial guards moved aside to make a path and let the 2 eunuchs into the temple. These 2 eunuchs were Gao Lishur and Yang Sishu. Because the so-called execution of Princess Taiping by the 2 actually had more to it than meets the eye, they did not bring anyone else. However, Yang Sishuan's martial arts were outstanding. Although Gao Lishur's martial arts were not as superb as Yang Sishuan's, he was still someone who had practiced martial arts and had a strong body. In addition, the 2 of them had actually come with a death exemption edict, so they were not worried that Taiping's death warriors would do anything to them. "Brother Yang, General Yang." Yang Sishu and Gao Lishur bowed respectfully when they saw Yang Fan. They knew that Yang Fan was here and were not surprised. It was Yang Fan who told the Emperor Emeritus that Princess Taiping was in the Mount Zhongnan Zen Temple. Because of his relationship with Li Longji, Yang Fan did not mind appearing in front of these 2 angels. Princess Taiping saw the 2 eunuchs walk into the courtyard and quickly wiped away the tears on her face. She looked at them proudly and said, "The Emperor sent you to execute me?" Yang Sishu and Gao Lisher looked at each other. Gao Lisher took a few steps forward and said in a low voice, "Princess, what you have done is truly unforgivable. However, you are His Majesty's aunt. His Majesty is benevolent and filial and cannot bear to harm you. However, if the princess is not executed, he cannot explain to the world. So," Princess Taiping said in a carefree manner, "just say it. There is no need to beat around the bush." Gao Lisher laughed dryly and said, "To the outside world, His Majesty still has to announce that the princess is executed. However, the Emperor Emeritus can buy a palace for the princess, but from then on, the princess cannot appear in front of the world." Princess Taiping smiled faintly and teased him, "Is this forgiveness that imperial brother pleaded for me?" Gao Lisher bowed, not daring to say anything else. Yang Fan walked closer and said in a low voice, "Just agree to it. Let's solve the problem in front of us first. When this matter is over, I will find a way to save you." Princess Taiping stared at him and said in a daze, "You are willing to take me away?" Yang Fan nodded vigorously. Princess Taiping said, "But my identity, aren't you afraid of others making irresponsible remarks? Although I didn't kill the people of Peach Blossom Village, they died because of me. Aren't you afraid of people pointing fingers at you?" Yang Fan's eyes were dark and bright, as if they could even absorb light. "Human? Who is this person? I am me, and people are people. What is there to be afraid of? Fuck them." Princess Taiping smiled. There was an indescribable meaning in her smile. Yang Fan said worriedly, "Taiping." He was worried that with Taiping's strong personality, she would not be able to put down her pride and accept Li Longji's arrangement. Taiping's eyes gradually softened. She sighed softly, nodded silently to Yang Fan, and walked towards the meditation room. Yang Fan anxiously said, "Taiping, where are you going?" Princess Taiping stopped and said lightly, "I want to dress up before going to see the emperor." Yang Fan agreed and stopped. Taiping's face was indeed very haggard, and tears were also on her face. With her always proud personality, even if she lost, she would not be willing to appear in front of the winner in such a state. Yang Fan, Yang Sisu, Gao Lisher, Taiping's internal and external steward Li Yi, Zhou Min, and 4 female sumo wrestlers were waiting in the courtyard. The other 4 female sumo wrestlers went inside to help Taiping dress up. Thinking about the 4 female sumo wrestlers' fingers that were thicker than carrots, and they actually needed them to dress up, Yang Fan had a strange feeling in his heart. They waited in the courtyard for a long time, but the wait for a woman to dress up was already a kind of hair-raising wait. So they didn't feel that it was a long time. They just waited and waited. Suddenly, they heard a rough cry that sounded like a man or a woman coming from inside the room. It made Yang Fan shiver, and an ominous feeling suddenly surged in his heart. He rushed over as fast as he could and opened the door. Taiping's hair was tied up in a high bun, and she wore a golden buyao. She was wearing a red peony rich brocade robe, and she was sitting cross-legged on a praying mat in the middle of the room. She was graceful and beautiful like a bride about to be married. The 4 female sumo wrestlers were kneeling in front of her, crying bitterly. Yang Fan's heart immediately sank to the bottom. He stood at the door, not daring to take a step forward. Everything in front of him made him feel a strong sense of unease. He was afraid of knowing the truth. When Taiping saw him, she calmly smiled and said to the 4 female sumo wrestlers, "You all go out." No one dared to disobey her. The 4 female sumo wrestlers kowtowed to her 3 times with tears streaming down their faces, then walked backwards out of the quiet room. A moment later, the 4 female sumo wrestlers waiting outside also let out sorrowful cries. Following that, Li Yi and Zhou Min threw themselves in front of the quiet room's door and cried loudly. Yang Fan's heartstrings trembled. He slowly walked into the room and closed the door. But he could not stop the heart-wrenching cry that came from outside the door. Yang Fan walked to Taiping's side and said with a trembling voice, "What happened to you?" Taiping brightly smiled at him. Her face was so radiant that people could not look straight at her. "Erlang, I'm going." Yang Fan's face suddenly lost color. Princess Taiping smiled, happily. "The two of us can be considered to have met the right person at the wrong time. Unfortunately, one chasing and one chasing, one leaving and one staying, it became a love calamity that I could not solve in my life. Thus, the everlasting world became the separation of the swallow. I used to hate that things remain the same, but people have changed. In fact, people and things are still there, but you and I are not the same as we were in the past. So I thought, letting go like this is also a kind of relief. There are many things in life that are not right or wrong, and there is no right or wrong. Love, live, laugh, and be sad, that is enough. After all, if the heart is gone, then it is something that even I can do nothing about. But now I finally know, in fact, you still have me in your heart. I am very happy. I am different from One is the Minister of Internal Affairs. She is talented and romantic, but monstrous power is nothing to her. She can give up everything to be with you." Yang Fan grabbed her wrist and said anxiously, "I will take you to the city to find a famous doctor." Princess Taiping shook her head peacefully and said with a smile, "It is useless. If there is an antidote for the poison I took, why would I take it? Erlang, let me finish. I am different from One. When I was born, I carried too many things. Some shackles were created by others or the situation. Some were my own choices. But no matter which one it was, I could not get rid of it. So, even if there are no other obstacles, you and I are destined to be on the same side. Regardless of these things in front of me, this is my life, my life." Taiping took a deep look at Xue Xiao's memorial tablet. When they were young, he was her cousin. When they grew up, he was her husband. She once thought that she would be with this man forever, but in the end, he left her. She should bear the responsibility for the mistakes he made. In this way, she could die proudly and not die silently in captivity like her mother. It was the same for Yang Fan in front of him. No matter how much she had experienced, no matter how much love and hate she had experienced, she had to leave when it was time to leave. She had to leave her previous path, her past stories, and her past people. It was enough. There was no such thing as eternity in the world, right? Life is like summer flowers, and death is like autumn leaves. Taiping peacefully snuggled into Yang Fan's embrace. Yang Fan held her hand. All the restraints no longer existed. His heart was filled with love and sorrow. He lowered his head and gazed at Taiping's face. Suddenly, he found a strand of white hair on her temple. Yang Fan gently pulled it out. He could not help but burst into tears. The Tang dynasty went through a series of fierce battles. The imperial family, Wu family, Wei family, Second Zhang family, Taiping's party. One after another, the imperial family, the Wu family, the Wei family, the Second Zhang family, the Taiping clique, one after another. Finally, everything was over. The dust settled. The imperial power was highly unified. In the 12th month of that year, on a snowy morning, the young emperor, Li Sanlang, decided on the New Year's title, Kai Yuan. Thus, the Tang dynasty began a new era, moving towards the peak of the Li Tang dynasty. The years of Jianghu made people grow old. The willows by the Longqing Pond had turned green many times. The lotus flowers under the hibiscus tower had bloomed many times. Another spring of the Kai Yuan year arrived. In this spring, the annual banquet for the new jinshi began again. A colorful boat carrying 30 new jinshi slowly sailed to the center of the Chu River. They recited poems, listened to songs, drank wine, and watched dances. Their songs echoed in the air, and their sleeves fluttered on the surface of the water. Suddenly, for some reason, the boat capsized. The Buddha said, "In the blink of an eye, there are 65 moments." In just a moment, the boat capsized, and the new jinshi were captured under the boat. On the top of the Wild Goose Pagoda, Lu Binji looked at the capsized boat and smiled coldly. He turned to look at the person beside him. That person was Ashina Musi. Lu Binji invited the world's famous doctors to treat him. Now, he could speak like an ordinary person. After Lu Binji's patient training, his mannerisms and tone of speech had become exactly the same as Yang Fan. Lu Binji looked at him and smiled. He said, "It has begun. From now on, you will help me get my revenge. As long as I can eradicate Shen Mu and Yang Fan and unify the succession hall, I will use all my financial and material resources to help you become the Khan of the Turks." Musi nodded deeply, revealing a smile that was exactly the same as Yang Fan's. An ox cart slowly drove to the front of the Jade Truth Temple. The curtain of the cart was lifted, and a female Taoist priest walked out. Her eyes were clear like water, her brows were like distant mountains, and her waist was like a willow. She turned to look at the cart and said coquettishly, "Hey, you look like a pig now. Why are you so energetic at night? Come out." A soft hand reached into the cart and pulled out a pig named Shen Mu, who looked sleepy. The two of them got off the cart and walked towards the Jade Truth Temple. When the female Taoist priest saw the two of them, they bowed and said, "Greetings, golden, immortal Taoist priest. Greetings, young Master Shen." In the bamboo forest, on a stone platform, there was a chessboard. Yang Fan and Princess Yuzhen sat on one side, one holding black and the other white. They were playing chess. Li Qiang pouted and stared at him. She muttered, "Really, you don't know how to give way to others." Golden Immortal Princess walked over and smiled. "Shenyang." "Ah, sister." Seeing that she was about to lose, Li Qiang took the opportunity to throw away her chess piece and ran towards Golden Immortal Princess. Shen Mu looked at Yang Fan, who was smiling bitterly. He frowned and said, "I heard that something happened at the Chu River banquet. All the new jinshi that we painstakingly nurtured became the son-in-law of the Water Dragon King. You still have the mood to be so carefree?" Yang Fan rolled his eyes at him and said, "Aren't you just as carefree? What are we raising our sons for? We naturally need them to help us with this matter." By the lake of the Chu River, a pair of youths, one in green and the other in white, looked like a jade tree. On top of the Farong Pavilion, a beautiful young girl's face suddenly popped out and said coquettishly to them, "Shen Kangwen, come up quickly. I lost to your sister at Shuanglu again. If you don't come and help me, I won't have a dowry in the future." The green-robed youth immediately put on a sly expression and said, "Nianrong, don't be anxious. I'll go and help you right now." The green-robed youth's mouth was full of sweet words, but his feet did not move. After he coaxed young Nianrong back to the pavilion, his expression turned solemn. He said to the white-robed youth who was standing with his hands behind his back, "Nianzu, it's really strange that none of the 30 new jinshi survived. What do you think about that pair of old men slacking off and leaving this matter to you and me to handle?" The white-robed youth said with a deep expression, "There must be something fishy about this." End of the book. Epilogue every ending. When C always wets himself. I'm very satisfied with the state I'm in today. Every time I end a story, I always have the idea of writing it with a phoenix head, a pig's belly, and a leopard's tail. I want to write an ending that will leave a lingering aftertaste, and I am very satisfied with this. After finishing this book, first of all, I want to express my gratitude to my readers who have always supported me. This is sincere gratitude. Without your support, it would be very difficult for me to continue writing such a long novel after so many years of writing. Thank you for your love and support for me all the time. I sincerely express my gratitude to you. Thank you. If this book can give you an unforgettable story so that you can remember some of the plots and some of the characters when you want to, I think that's my success. However, as a creator, it's never possible to achieve perfection. At the end of every book, a good summary of one's own mistakes will help one grow, and it will be even more helpful for the creation of the next book. As for this book, it's a transformation within my historical novel. So far, it's not very successful. Among the novels I've written, if I had to rate them myself, I would give them a relatively low score. The main reason is the influence of habitual thinking. Even if I don't transmigrate, my thinking is still the habitual thinking of transmigrating, so there's a problem in the design of the story causing the story to lack suspense. Moreover, the main character is limited by the established history, so there's not much room for him to express himself, and the excitement will be reduced. This point is not something that you can avoid if you want to change your style and realize that you're writing something different from the past. For example, my classmate Xiao Ao's new Xuanhuan novel. Some readers suggested that the foreshadowing is too long and the style of writing is like a historical novel. However, when we talked privately, he actually had a clear train of thought and also knew which aspect he should focus on in his novel. However, without experiencing it personally, he would still be affected by habitual thinking. Now, classmate Old Duan is also writing Xuanhuan. What a tragedy! I still don't know how his new book will turn out. They're all capable writers, and I believe that if they encounter a setback, it's mainly a problem of habitual thinking. After experiencing it once, they'll be able to avoid it the next time. My problem only became clear when I wrote more than 900 chapters of this book. I'm 100% sure that I can avoid problems like suspense and interest when I'm writing the next book. Speaking of the next book, perhaps a lot of students will be concerned about what I'm going to write and when I'll start writing. What a tragedy! I have a lot of problems. Can you understand? One problem actually started when I finished writing Hui Ming. I always wanted to add something more to it, but my hipster illness acted up, and there was no cure. After finishing Hui Ming, I didn't care about the huge number of readers my first book had accumulated. It was as if I took the wrong medicine and insisted on writing Xuanhuan. After I finished Xuanhuan, I wasn't satisfied and went on to write City. This continued until I was criticized by a reader in the book review section. Jin Yong has only written wuxiao in his entire life, and Qiong Yao has only written romance in her entire life. Why do you have to try everything? Although I was scolded, I still wanted to change in the historical genre. As a matter of fact, after a few consecutive transmigrations, I made some slight adjustments. I changed the historical legend and stopped writing about transmigrations. My results were slightly affected, but it's not a big problem. I know where my problem lies, and I have enough confidence to make the next book more exciting. Speaking of my ideas for the next book, I really can't write Xuanhuan or Xianxia, and if I want to change, I'll lean towards City. Originally, I thought of two ideas, a city with superpowers and a historical novel. The historical novel can completely avoid the problems that Drunken Pillow encountered, and it will be very exciting. As for the city novel, it definitely won't be as realistic as All the Way Over the Rainbow. Personally, I was leaning towards writing the city novel first. In the end, not even half a month after I announced this idea, city novels encountered a frost period. There was a crackdown, and some city novel authors were beaten black and blue. Even their wives couldn't recognize them. I very sadly announced, looking at this situation, it seems like I'm forced to set the setting in the Republic of China. As a result, everyone knows just a week after I said this, the Republic of China novel was also swept up in the wind. As a result, now I don't know if I should touch this city novel immediately. If my words are really that bad, I decided to announce one after another. I want to write Xuanhuan, I want to write Xianxia, I want to write MMO, I want to write esports, I want to write, if unfortunately, I believe that the online authors will raise funds to get rid of this crow mouth of mine. All right, let's not talk about this dilemma for now. Let's talk about the helpless situation of the history genre in the wireless market. There aren't many wireless readers who are interested in the history genre, and the top 3 wireless subscribers don't have much money either. I'm thinking about putting my book in the Xianxia or Xuanhuan genre and then tricking all the wireless readers into reading it. What if he's willing to stay? But I also feel that if I write a book that's clearly not Xianxia, wouldn't I be too thick-skinned to force myself into the popular genre? So, I'm still conflicted. Seeing a mountain is a mountain. Seeing a mountain isn't a mountain. Now, seeing a mountain is still a mountain. This is the realm that I've worked hard to reach. Currently, I'm studying at the Lu Institute, mingling with the students of traditional literature. I've just passed half of the 4-month study period, but the intense collision of ideas has also triggered and greatly helped me. I've always fantasized about combining online literature and traditional literature, taking the advantages of each. Now, I finally understand. Cherish life, stay away from tradition, and firmly draw a clear line between revolution. But then again, when it comes to what I'm going to write next, I actually still want to change. But this change is different from the kind of blind change in the past. This is a conscious change. Why is it that there are still some historical authors that I haven't listed, but I already know because they haven't announced that I need to keep it a secret? Are you kidding me? Changing is not only for a breakthrough in creation, but also for a breakthrough in career. Wanting to make a breakthrough in creation is a kind of responsibility. Is there any new plot to speak of after transmigrating? It's not that you don't want to innovate, but you can't innovate with a narrow and special theme. It's just like the martial arts novels of the past. You can only compete on the level of writing, but content is king. If you only rely on writing, when the readers get tired of it, you'll still be finished. If you don't succeed in breaking a new path, you retreat, you'll waste the experience you gain from setbacks. Then, there's my career. I've written a total of 8 novels, all of which have sold their movie rights, all of which have been published in simplified Chinese, 7 of which have been published in traditional Chinese, except for the urban novel, which has a strong atmosphere of the mainland, 1 of which has been sold as a drama, 2 of which have been sold as a manga, and 1 of which has been sold as a mobile game. I've maintained the number 1 position in Qijian for a long time, and I've even made it to the top of the rankings from time to time. But that's all there is to it. The derivative value of these novels combined is not even comparable to that of a fantasy or xianxia novel. It took 10 years for web novels to become popular than paper novels, and it only took 2 years for the wireless version to surpass the PC version. This is the general trend, and it's also the main reason why many people in the industry rush Tien and decisively. It's a dilemma. Personally, I'm still wavering. My next book is either a historical fantasy or an urban supernatural, and I'm still wavering. If any readers have any thoughts, you can post them in the book review section to help me clarify my thoughts. Let's see which one I should write first. Thoughts are always maturing, so my choices and judgments will constantly change. The only thing that doesn't change is my love for writing. I sincerely hope that you can continue to love me and continue to support me. I love you, Ba.